The Aztec Empire did not fall because obedience vanished. It fell while obedience was still visible, still performed, still ritualized. Tribute arrived on schedule. Envoys followed protocol. Cities acknowledged authority in the required forms. The contradiction is not that power was resisted too late, but that it was obeyed too well. Stability appeared intact precisely because submission continued. What went unnoticed was that obedience had become inert, no longer reinforcing authority, only masking its exposure. For more than a century before the Spanish arrival, the Mexica rulers governed through a carefully maintained structure of dominance. Power radiated outward from Tenochtitlan through alliances, conquests, and obligations. The empire did not administer its territories uniformly. It demanded compliance, not integration. Cities were left with their own rulers, customs, and internal hierarchies, so long as tribute flowed and ritual acknowledgement remained unbroken. Authority was measured less by presence than by response. The empire's reach was confirmed each time goods arrived, captives were delivered, and ceremonies were performed without disruption. This arrangement created an appearance of durability. The capital grew immense, its temples expanded, its rituals intensified. Military campaigns reinforced prestige and fear in equal measure. Power was reaffirmed through repetition. Each cycle of tribute confirmed the last. Each act of submission was treated as evidence that control remained secure. The empire did not need to occupy every space because obedience traveled in advance of force. Yet this mode of rule carried a quiet assumption that compliance reflected consent, or at least acceptance. The empire read outward behavior as inward stability. As long as cities did not openly revolt, they were considered contained. Silence was interpreted as order. Participation was interpreted as loyalty. Power did not seek to know what submission concealed, only that it continued. Over time, this produced a narrowing of perception at the center. Authority grew confident in its own image. The Mexica elite increasingly encountered the empire through ritualized affirmation. Messages that arrived in Tenochtitlan were shaped by protocol. Deference filtered communication. What reached the rulers was not raw sentiment, but managed response. Power heard echoes of itself and mistook them for consensus. Tribute, in particular, became a stabilizing illusion. The flow of goods suggested economic control, but it also allowed resentment to accumulate without expression. Cities paid because payment was cheaper than defiance. Compliance reduced immediate risk while preserving long-term hostility. The empire interpreted this rational submission as enduring dominance. It did not register the difference between obedience born of fear and obedience born of allegiance. The ritual calendar reinforced this blindness. Authority was renewed through spectacle, sacrifice, and repetition. These acts were not symbolic alone. They were political instruments that bound the empire together through shared participation. But ritual can conceal as much as it reveals. As ceremonies grew more elaborate, they affirmed the empire's power to itself more than to its subjects. Participation became compulsory rather than connective. The meaning of obedience shifted while its form remained unchanged. Military strength further complicated perception. The Aztec state was formidable in open conflict. Its armies were organized, experienced, and feared. Victories reinforced the belief that dominance was secure. But military success also reduced the incentive to question stability. Force became the answer to disruption, even as disruption grew quieter and more diffuse. Power prepared for revolt, not for indifference or opportunistic realignment. When the Spanish arrived, they did not encounter a unified empire defending itself. They encountered a network of compliant cities whose obedience had never implied commitment. Many continued to perform submission to the Mexica while simultaneously negotiating with an external force. This was not betrayal in the moral sense, it was continuity. These cities had always obeyed strategically. They adjusted their calculations when the balance shifted. The central authority misread this adjustment because it had never fully recognized the conditional nature of obedience. As long as tribute arrived, power assumed allegiance endured. When some cities withheld support or quietly assisted the invaders, the response was delayed, fragmented, and confused. Authority struggled to interpret actions that did not fit the familiar pattern of open rebellion. Even as pressure mounted, the empire continued to rely on established forms. Messengers were sent, ritual consultations were held, responses were filtered through tradition. Power acted as if repetition itself could restore control. The possibility that obedience had ceased to function as a stabilizing force remained difficult to articulate, even internally. To question obedience was to question the empire's own definition of rule. What fractured was not the capacity to command, but the capacity to interpret. Power had trained itself to read compliance as confirmation. When compliance no longer carried the same meaning, authority lacked the vocabulary to respond. Orders could still be issued, but they no longer organized behavior reliably. Some were followed, others ignored, still others delayed until circumstances rendered them irrelevant. The inward turn of this pattern reveals a deeper tension. Authority depends on signals. It requires feedback that distinguishes stability from stasis. When power surrounds itself with affirmation, it becomes increasingly sensitive to disruption, but increasingly blind to erosion. The Aztec elite inhabited a world where obedience was visible everywhere, but trust was nowhere measured. The absence of revolt was taken as proof of cohesion, rather than as a warning of accumulated restraint. This raises an uncomfortable question. How does power tell the difference between order that holds and order that merely persists? When compliance becomes a survival strategy rather than a bond, authority may continue to function while losing its foundation. The empire remained impressive, organized, and feared. Yet fear alone does not anchor loyalty. It delays opposition without dissolving it. The final phase did not arrive as a sudden collapse. It unfolded through hesitation and misalignment. Decisions were made under assumptions that no longer applied. Alliances were expected to activate automatically. They did not. Commands were issued with confidence. They were received with calculation. Power confronted not resistance, but optionality. In the aftermath, the rapid unraveling seemed inexplicable to those at the center. How could an empire so vast, so disciplined, so obeyed, yield so quickly? The question itself reveals the misreading. Obedience had never been the same as stability. It had been a surface condition mistaken for depth. What lingers is the pattern's persistence. Power that governs through dominance often measures success by silence. It counts the absence of revolt as validation. Over time, it builds institutions that reinforce this reading. Ritual, tribute, and hierarchy become self-referential signals. Authority listens only for noise and overlooks the quiet recalibration happening beneath compliance. The Aztec Empire did not ignore warning signs. It simply misclassified them. Obedience continued, so instability seemed absent. By the time obedience shifted from constraint to convenience, power no longer recognized the moment as dangerous. The empire stood intact until it did not. Its authority impressive in form but hollow in reach. The pattern does not resolve into a lesson. It remains suspended in the tension between appearance and function. Power persists through signals, but signals can outlive substance. When authority confuses performance for stability, it may find itself obeyed right up to the moment it is no longer relevant. And when relevance disappears, obedience offers no warning. If this reflection resonated with you, you can find more explorations like this on Timeless Questions, where history, power, and human nature quietly intersect.